All right, praising God for, among other things, warnings. As ominous as that can sound, sometimes it's better to get a warning than to move forward, free of anything you don't want to hear, only to find out that there was trouble ahead. And so, in this chapter, Daniel chapter 5, let's call it Gold, the End. Understanding that this chapter is going to seem to tell us about the end of the kingdom of Babylon, previously described as the head of gold in the chapter 2 dream or vision that Nebuchadnezzar had Daniel interpret for him. With that, in this chapter, it is going to talk about King Belshazzar, described as the son of King Nebuchadnezzar, who is going to bring in the vessels that his father took from the temple in Jerusalem in a time when he wants to throw a party. And throwing his party, he's going to think that it's going to be a great idea to take the holy vessels and make them a common service item for his party, for them to drink out of, and not only drink out of, but to honor the idols of Babylon with. Understanding that we have a term called microaggressions that we use now. This is a chapter that lets us know that even if that wasn't a term back then, it was a thing back then. And as Daniel is once again called in to interpret the meaning of what's happening next in this story, we're going to see that God interprets microaggressions in addition to the things he is going to allow his servant Daniel to see. As the writing on the wall is probably the more famous portion of this story. At the point at which they begin to drink from the holy vessels, almost immediately, I think it's going to say, a hand appears, writing on the wall words they don't understand, prompting them to call in the wise men who likewise do not understand the meaning of the writing. But the queen is going to recall that there was a wise man who served his father during the days of King Nebuchadnezzar, who was able to interpret mysteries that others simply couldn't. That man was Daniel, who the king is going to call in, telling Daniel, I have heard of you and your great ability to interpret mysteries. And I guess in this instance, not in this instance, but dreams as well. That's what he did for his father. And this time it's going to be the mystery of the writing. And he is going to say that if you are able to interpret the writing, he will make him third in the kingdom, at which point Daniel is going to say you can keep your presence, but I will let you know what the writings are. I will let you know what the writing means. Once again, deep breath, slow down. As he goes on to tell him a history of how we got to this point, meaning his dad, Nebuchadnezzar, rose but was humbled by the God that he, King Belshazzar, has refused to listen to. As Daniel's going to say, you saw what happened to your dad. You refused to heed the warning. And now you have gone beyond that to dishonor the God who gave the warning. Understanding that drinking out of the vessels does not appear to simply be happenstance. It appears to be what we might call today a microaggression, dishonoring that which his father eventually honored, as we saw in the last chapter, finally coming to his senses to give credit where credit was due to the God who continued to bail him out of his difficult situations. Now for his son, however, is going to appear to be too late, as Daniel goes on to interpret the writing, which is Mene, Tekel, Parson. I'm probably mispronouncing each and every word of that, but the interpretation is your days have been numbered. You have been weighed and found wanting, and your kingdom has been parsed between the Medes and the Persians. The chapter is going to end with promises being fulfilled. First of all, the king is going to make good on his promise. Got to give credit where credit is due, because a lot of kings would have simply been angry and maybe said, look, if I'm going down, everybody's going down with me. He could have lashed out against Daniel, but he makes good on his promise to Daniel, as the chapter is going to end up showing us that likewise, God makes good on his promise to the king, who is killed that night and replaced by Darius the Mede. Thus, as it seems, ending the reign of the head of gold, the kingdom of Babylon. This chapter reminding me, as we mentioned, of the importance of warnings. There were, I guess, at least 3 red flags that seem to stand out and catch my attention in this chapter. First and foremost, the fact that even though his dad took the items from the temple of God, there's a reason why they weren't using them, but an understanding that life is filled with all kinds of subtleties that any of us can miss. The second red flag seemed for me to be the fact that he had to call the wise men in, which seems to be an indication, as we discussed on Wednesday, that he might have created an environment where wisdom was no longer welcomed around him, especially in his times of leisure. He might have had too bright a line between his working mindset and his leisure mindset, understanding that trouble does not necessarily take days or hours off. He had to call the wise men in, understanding that the third red flag that caught my attention was the way that Daniel was going to be promoted to third in the kingdom if he could interpret the dream. I'm not sure if that was a reflection that he had been demoted, but he'd gotten a pretty high honor under King Nebuchadnezzar for interpreting the statue dream back in chapter 2. And so he seemed like he was head over the province of Babylon. Now, it seems that even though he's offered a promotion to third in the kingdom, that represents a recovery of some status that he had lost. Once again, reminding us of the degree to which it wasn't just the wise men who had been driven away, but Daniel, who had not only been promoted to be chief over the province of Babylon, but chief over the wise men, seemed now to be an afterthought in the kingdom. Which reminds me of a New Testament passage in Hebrews chapter 5, describing in verses 11 through 14 the process of spiritual maturity that it likens unto the difference between the kind of food you would have to feed to a young child, even an infant, versus solid food fit for an adult, where verse 14 concludes by saying, "But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil." Reminding me that wisdom is not one of those things that we can simply turn on and off. One of the foundations or fundamental principles of wisdom seems to be realizing that there are times in life when we're going to need it. And so it is not enough to simply call on wisdom in times of desperation. It is one of those things that, much like muscles that atrophy, if we do not, as we say from time to time in our discussions here, if we do not practice using wisdom when we most need it, like King Belshazzar, we might find that it's nowhere near us.